We are live here on Tuesday, April 29th, 2025 in House Transportation, continuing to work on S-123 miscellaneous motor vehicles law bill and 315. So we are looking at sections more particularly 15, 16, 17, 18 around driver, non-driver IDs and early renewals and pieces of that. And when we sort of brainstormed about who we could hear and what the background was and why this was needed and the issues and the intent and the effort solution. I remember real IDs and non-real IDs. So we are asking Monica Allard to join us and talk about sections 15, 16, 17, 18, why the genesis of it, what problem we're trying to solve, and how this bill might help do that. And so welcome to committee. If you also brought a colleague, if it comes time for them to talk, you introduce them too, and we'll turn it over. We're looking at real IDs, non-real IDs, non-voter, non-driver ID, etc. A whole mash. And so welcome to committee.
Thank you for having me. My name is Monica Allard. My pronouns are she, her. I am a staff attorney with the ACLU of Vermont. I'm also on the board at the Pride Center of Vermont, but neither of those are sort of the capacities in which I'm appearing before you today. The ACLU of Vermont does fully support the changes that I'm proposing here, but I'm here before you as a co-founder of the Vermont Queer Legal Professionals. VTQLP is a group of 95 and counting queer lawyers, paralegals, law students, policy advocates throughout Vermont. And we were co-founded in 2021 out of a vision with myself, my colleague Jill Martin-Diaz, and Leah Brenner, out of a real need that we saw to create a space here in Vermont for queer legal professionals to come together like they have in other states. And it was a real need that we saw lacking here. So since then, our work has really focused on helping to connect queer Vermonters to affirming legal services, creating spaces where, queer legal professionals can talk about the issues that impact us. And here today, this is a part of our effort to speak with a unified voice about the issues that are impacting our community. So thank you so much for having me. I hope you will forgive any lack of polish here today. I am a litigator, I'm a staff attorney, I'm not a policy advocate, so this is new to me. And as I'm sure you've seen, if you're following the local news or the national news, at the ACLU as a litigator, I've been very busy. I've been very busy today in particular. So I really felt it was important to come and speak with you all despite all that, because this is something that we've been working on for a while and because it's something that's so important to our community. So to give you a little bit more context, I'm gonna, if it's helpful, just go through S-123 and just briefly outline what I'm here testifying in support of so that you have that context as I'm speaking. And then I can tell you a little bit more about how these bills came to be and why it's so important to us. So first, I'm testifying here in support of sections 15, 16, 17, and 18 of S-123. As the chair mentioned, thank you. I am proposing one change, which is to section 34. That's the effective date. Currently, the effective date for those sections is July 1. I'd like to see sections 15 through 18 effective immediately upon passage. I'm also here to advocate that language from the bill H351 be incorporated into S-123. Some elements of H351 that are not currently included that I'd really like to see included are an 8-year renewal period for driver's licenses and non-driver IDs. And a section 5, which includes this statement of intent and a request for a report about how the DMV can ensure that people's full legal names, including special characters, including multiple first or last names, are reflected on their licenses, and non-drivers IDs, so that folks with non-English last names, both citizens and non-citizens, can have accurate identification documents. To ensure that unhoused individuals that do not have permanent residence or permanent place of residence, even though they live in Vermont, can have access to identification, and are not further disenfranchised. So that's what I'm here proposing. And with that, let me tell you a little bit more about how H351 came to be. H351 was born out of a coalition with Vermont paralegal professionals and some community partners, and Representative Hidrick. And it came together because leading up to the election, our current federal administration made clear some plans that it had, including plans to disenfranchise transgender and non-binary Americans. And consistent with their pre-election promises, the federal administration has already taken steps to do so. One of those changes is to redefine in their interpretation of federal laws that includes the word sex and gender. And, we've seen this in reinterpretation be used already for things like the trans-military ban, transgender bathroom bans in federal buildings, and passports, which I'll talk to you more about. And one way that we expect this to continue is when it comes to real IDs. So currently, we have this federal real ID statute that sets minimum requirements for states if they're going to have real ID compliant licenses. And currently, while real IDs are required to have a gender marker on them, states sort of set their own rules about that. And here in Vermont, you all, after careful consideration and deliberation, have passed laws allowing Vermonters to self-attest to their gender identification on their state licenses. So we anticipate that in a move of federal overreach, there will be attempts by the Trump administration to interpret these real ID laws to require that states have real IDs match the gender on someone's birth certificate, for example. And this is consistent with what we've seen in their passport policy. So, based on the January 20th executive order, we've seen that passports now have been either rejected, and they're targeting the point of renewal and issuance. So if someone still has a passport that has an X gender marker, or that has a gender marker that's not consistent with their birth certificate. So in that case, those passports are still valid. But when people go to request a new passport or to renew their passport, under the current administration, what's happening is people are either being issued passports that have an incorrect gender marker on them based on the administration's assessment of what their gender marker should be. Or in some cases, they've simply retained the passports and not issued a new one, while this dispute is ongoing. And the result of this is that many trans and non-binary people here in Vermont that we've heard from at Vermont Paralegal Professionals have been reaching out and are afraid to renew their passports. They don't want to give up that identification because they might not get it back, or they might get it back and it might be wrong. And this means that coming up, we have this Real ID deadline on May 7th, where, if you don't have a real ID, if you just have a state issued ID that doesn't comply with real ID requirements, you won't be able to use that for domestic travel or to enter federal buildings. So real IDs are about to become even more important. And people have restricted access to passports. So this puts us in a real crunch point where it's critically important that trans and non-binary folks in Vermont continue to retain access to identification that matches their gender identity in order to move freely, in order to advocate for themselves with financial institutions, at school, at work, anywhere that you might be required to show an ID in a traffic stop, but are losing access to those things. And so Vermont has a real opportunity here to ensure continued access to affirming identification by first allowing people to renew early, so before these changes take effect, because they will take some time to take effect, and by allowing people a longer renewal period, because it is unlikely that this will be resolved soon. Even if the next administration takes a different view, which is not a guarantee, there may be federal overreach in the next administration as well. And even if this is litigated in courts, and I know the ACLU of Vermont or the ACLU National, is currently litigating the passport policy, and it's possible that they would litigate any overreach on real IDs as well. But if I know anything as a litigator, I know that litigation takes so much time. It takes years. So with that in mind, I want to tell you a little bit more about why it's so important that trans and non-binary people have access to identification that is true. And I guess I'll start by saying that we've seen just like a dramatic increase in people reaching out to us with concern about these issues. This is an issue that Vermonters are really concerned about, and this is not an insignificant number of Vermonters. In 2021, I think they found that 10% of Vermonters identify as LGBTQ. And while we don't have firm numbers on the number of trans and non-binary Vermonters, some estimates around that time place it as like well over 6,000. So this is a significant portion of our population that really needs our help. And having a document that does not reflect your gender identity is both like a dignity and a safety issue. It's a real challenge. And this is a problem because when you present to someone, a government official, say, an identification that has a gender marker on it that does not match their perception of you, how you present, people are more likely to be accused of using a fake ID. They're detained for longer for further questioning. Sometimes they're not allowed to move on or to move through the questioning until they out themselves as transgender. And in some really extreme circumstances, as we've seen with TSA, some folks are required to do strip searches and literally show their genitalia to prove that they are who they say they are. So it's a real issue. It's a real problem when people have to travel. It presents real safety concerns and real dignity challenges. It's embarrassing. It's burdensome. And more than that, having access to affirming identification is a way that people advocate for themselves. So I'm not trans, I'm not non-binary, but what I have done is I have helped many, many trans and non-binary loved ones, friends and colleagues to update their identification. It's not a short process. And luckily here in Vermont, we do have this self-attestation provision for our driver's licenses. But that's just really one step in the process. So, for many people, it involves going to court and getting a court order to change your name, and then updating your name and your gender marker with Social Security, updating it on your passport, updating it on your driver's license, updating it with your bank, updating it with your school and your work and every single institution that has ever sent you mail. Because, if you've ever changed your name after you got married, you know that just continues for like ever. And it takes a really long time for everyone to get it right. And there's so many steps along the way. And in this particular instance, unlike when you get married and have to change your name, there's just so many people along the way who are either doing it for the first time and are confused, don't have a computer system set up to do it, don't really feel like helping you, or don't agree with what you're doing. And so it's just an incredibly burdensome process. And renewing your ID is part of that process, right? It's also a real moment of celebration, for so many trans and non-binary people, getting that card that says, my government knows that I am who I say I am. And in every interaction, when someone challenges me, I can say, my government believes me, you should too. That's really powerful. So I guess I just want to emphasize that this is really not only about people's ability to move freely through the world, but also to participate fully in public life. So on that note, I want to talk to you all a little bit more about why the 8-year renewal period and why, aside from just extending the amount of time before someone has to renew, makes sense because it allows people to withstand this sort of mess that is inherent in this federalism challenge that we're experiencing right now, where we're trying to sort out what really belongs to the states and what belongs to the federal government. It allows people continued access during this period, but it also just makes sense for a lot of other reasons. Having an 8-year renewal period is becoming the standard. It's becoming the norm more and more. More than 50% of states have an 8-year renewal period. And that's largely a recent event. There's a real wave of changes of states moving towards an 8-year renewal period. So this is a national trend. It's consistent with the requirements of the Real ID Act. So the Real ID Act allows states to have up to an 8-year renewal period. So it's consistent with that. Here in Vermont, we don't require people to come in and take a picture every 2 years or 4 years. I believe it's every 9 years. I just renewed my license this week. So we're not even requiring people to come in or show any other additional documentation at the time of renewal. So there's no real reason that you need to go through this administrative process every 4 years instead of doing it every 8. We're not requiring additional residency or anything like that. So it just doesn't make sense. And it creates this additional administrative burden, both for the agency who has to process these renewals more frequently, and for individuals who have to remember to do it. Like I had to remember to do it, and get it done. They have to have access to a computer. They have to have access to the internet. And it risks disenfranchising people every time we have an expiration date. So every time someone's license expires, that means they're more likely to be driving without a valid license, which is another interaction with police. For non-citizens, it's another potential interaction with ICE. And it risks getting people who may already have higher burdens, stuck in cycles of poverty and criminalization that just are unnecessary. So that's my spiel on the 8-year renewal period. I also just want to mention that, like, for the same reasons that it's important to have an ID that has your correct gender marker on it, it's also really important that you have an ID that has your full legal name on it. You know, I really encourage you to take a look at the written testimony that was submitted by my colleague Jill Martin Diaz about this bill as well, because it does speak to the difficulty that non-citizens face in having identification, or citizens that just don't have English last names, and having IDs that don't match, that are inconsistent with different government records. It's confusing, it's a mess, and our system should be set up to support all of our citizens' names. So I want to make that plug. And I will happily take questions.
Thank you very much. Representative Boyd, you want to start?
So probably not for you, maybe you know the answer, but what's the photo? Is it every 4 years?
9.
9, it's every 9 years.
So if you go in person, you have to take it.
Say this again.
If you go to a DMV location in person, you have to.
Get a new photo, but if you renew
Online,
it has
it's
to be every 9 years. Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about you'd ask one of the parts that you'd like to see the effective date upon passage versus July 1st. Is it, and the reason for that is?
The reason for that is because, you know, we already have this executive order in place that's directing agencies to take a look about how they can implement this executive order and this redefinition of sex and gender. We have this, upcoming deadline of when real IDs will go into effect, the real ID requirement for federal travel. And we think it's likely that we'll see federal action on this very soon. So we would like people to be able to renew their driver's licenses and non-driver IDs now, so that before any potential lawsuits, disputes go into effect, they can have access to that identification.
Representative Case?
Are you saying that people from out of state can come here and get an ID? Is that what you were talking about earlier?
No.
Non-residents, you're saying,
No, I said non-citizens.
what do you mean by non-citizens? Give me an example.
Like right now, in Vermont, we allow both US citizens and people, green card holders, or other immigrants with different immigration statuses to have access to driver's licenses and non-licensed IDs. That's currently allowed under Vermont law.
And that includes undocumented also?
Yeah, I believe so. But that's not a change that we're talking about today.
You don't want me to talk about the other one, so I'll stay out of that.
Sure.
Representative Burke?
I just want to add to that conversation. There are a number of people who prefer to have a non-real ID license for various reasons. They didn't want to give a lot of their legal US residents, as well as undocumented people who have been working on our farms, keeping the dairies open. And that was sort of the reason behind the push to get the driver's privilege card, so that those people who were keeping our dairies open could go and shop and go to medical appointments. But, and I don't know what the percentage of people who are just regular US citizens who prefer to have a non-driver ID, that it's an issue. It's something that a lot of people want. And they don't want to have we heard this in this committee, they don't want to have a real ID, and maybe they have a passport so they can travel. So just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. I think having this other option is really important. It's set by Vermont law and it's controlled by Vermont law. And many people who may have made that choice in the past won't make that choice moving forward with this new Real ID requirement in federal law. And particularly for trans and non-binary Vermonters, where access to their passports is being limited. Real IDs become even more important.
The part of what you had asked or mentioned about TSA example and passport examples, of course, are completely out of our realm of issue of what we can do or not do on a state level. Is there particular examples in the state per se, the non-real ID and the real ID, we can only impact our state pieces? And I noticed that the examples that you talked about were federal law.
Yeah,
How does this maybe help, I guess, versus the area they're talking about, the May 7th, which we have no control over and nothing we can do about it here in this committee, but the examples that you were talking about in terms of that are passport related and TSA related, how does this help with that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think it's important that we really nail down that particular link. And how it helps is that people need to use real IDs to travel and to access federal buildings. And that choice about whether to issue and how long to issue a real ID is still in Vermont's control. And while those requirements might, or the interpretation of those requirements, not the requirements themselves, but the interpretation of those requirements may change, that specifically targets renewals and issuances. And so if people don't have to go back in and renew very frequently, then they can continue to have access to identification during this time. Does that make sense?
I
might.
it answers my question. It helps answer my question if that's what you're.
Yeah, it's a
so-
little, I apologize if I'm not being super
You're
clear,
fine.
but the point being primarily that, that Vermont right now as a state has set requirements for when it can issue real IDs and when it can issue identification generally. And it interprets federal law in doing that. And if its interpretation differs from the federal administration, that might create a pressure point. But right now, we have the ability to determine how long our renewal periods are in a way that's consistent with the act, in a way that will impact how trans and non-binary people can travel from Vermont safely everywhere that they're going, within the US. So in each of those, when we talked about TSA interactions, for example, you all here in the Vermont State House can make those interactions safer by making sure that trans and non-binary people have access to affirming identification for longer.
Representative White and then Representative Powell.
Yeah, thank you very much for your testimony. So just a question. Have Vermonters had trouble renewing their passports or had difficult TSA? That's that's not quite the right word, but TSA encounters.
Yes, yes, they have. And primarily, I mean, I'm not going to speak to anyone's specific experiences that aren't mine to share, but I can tell you that has happened. And I will tell you that the primary way in which we see this come up is right now people are just too afraid to renew their passports. And so they're letting them expire. And not traveling for weddings, for funerals, for all of the like very important reasons that we need to travel, because they just don't think it's safe.
So just to follow up on that, but I would think that if a Vermonter had an issue renewing their passport and it wasn't returned to them, having a valid real ID or identification card that wasn't going to be expiring soon would be a very good tool for them to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It would give them access back to continue to travel throughout the US. And just to access federal buildings like the ones we have, throughout, yeah.
Representative Powell?
Yeah, thanks for your testimony. So, it seems like, you know, I could explain it simpler, but you correct me when this bill, the motor vehicle bill that, we're looking at, and, H 351 really doesn't change any of the requirements on how you get these things, what documents you need, or any of those. It's all really just that I can see, it's a timing thing. So in the motor vehicle bill that we're discussing now, the only thing you're really saying is, can we make it act upon passing rather than wait until July?
And I'm hoping that you'll add back in the provisions, from H,
Right, but then I'm getting H 351. The only thing there that it really does is, instead of 4 years, you can now get 8 years, like 50% of the other states.
Right, more than 50%.
Okay, so it's really just not changing the requirements, not changing what you do, how you do it, what it costs, any of that. It's really just, let's allow you to renew your license for longer.
Mhm.
And we're saying now up to 8 years. And let's make that happen on passage.
That's right.
I mean, I guess my 2 cents is, you know, I totally fine with the early renewal. But as far as making it 8 years, is my heartburn is the ebb and flows of the way the money comes into transportation funds. It's unpredictable. I know eventually it'll settle off and you can, you know, manage it, but without knowing the true ramification of if we did it right now, it would cause me great concern of lost revenue, especially when we're looking at a $30 million downfall of next year for our T-fund revenue. So, I mean, that's my biggest concern. It's not just easy as this, let's make it 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. It's about the money, how we predict that and count on that on a, you know, regular basis. And the third thing I guess I'm intrigued by is that the name. So your full legal name, if it's too long, it gets abbreviated. Is what
Yeah.
you're saying?
I
didn't realize that.
I would have to defer to others who know more about that. I know that right now it's not possible for everyone to get their full legal name. I do think abbreviations are required, but also many names use special characters. For example, they have accents over certain letters that are not currently reflected.
With our new computer system and the $56 million computer system, that might be more, you would think that could be able to handle that. So that's something I would be interested to hear, you know, more about that.
Yeah,
So I'm with you on a couple of them, but going to me just personally, going to 8 years wouldn't say that.
So, question on
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, why the 4 year? Why the 8 year?
so the 8 year is important because right now, many people's driver's licenses and non-driver ID cards are set to expire.
Yeah.
And if they renewed them, even for 4 years, likely would not be able to renew them in the amount of time that it would take for this current and anticipated dispute around gender markers to be resolved. So it's likely that they would be issued a real ID if that's what they were getting.
So I guess it's not that Vermont isn't doing it. You're saying at the federal level, they may change the real ID requirements that
Yeah.
we have no control over. And we
Right.
would have to follow what the federal government is saying a real ID must have on it.
So I'm not I'm not saying that we would have to follow it because the requirements for real IDs are set by statute. And I do think our current processes comply with those statutes.
Right?
The Trump administration may take a different interpretation of that statute.
Of the Vermont
and
statute?
Of the federal statute.
Okay,
And it is, you know, a question that I imagine would be litigated, whether executive order or the Vermont state legislature would control in that situation.
okay, so federal law passes a law and the state of Vermont interprets that law for its own purposes in this state.
Yes,
And currently, I think I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but is there an issue? Because when you go to renew your license, there's a check mark, circle, the little circle, male, female, other. Is the other going to be an issue for getting a passport?
it's already an
It's-
issue for getting a passport.
Okay, regardless of what's going on with the Trump
No,
administration.
because of the
it's
Trump
always-
administration.
Okay,
It
so-
previously was not, and now
Okay,
it's,
so if I were to renew during the Biden administration, my
yes,
passport
yes,
with the other
With an
checked
X,
and the
yeah.
real ID, I would be fine.
yes.
Okay, okay.
So in the, from now until November.
Yeah.
This is a manual process within the DMV. And in November, renewals will be automated and released across Vermonters through their My DMV accounts and everywhere through. So it's a manual process for everybody right now. And if we open up, I don't know what you would anticipate as a rush or not a rush or an amount. The DMV has to, each person that processes them has to, it's a different process than what it will be in November. So the testimony that we heard. When people lose their driver's license, we charge a fee for the replacement, and people cause additional work at the DMV that's above what normally happens. We charge a convenience fee, or we charge a replacement fee. And this fee, in this scenario, creates a work that's a manual process beyond what happened and what will change in November. How do you feel about that portion of it?
Yeah, I want to address sort of both of your questions at the same time. I feel allow me. Because I think they both raise, you know, important administrative considerations. And I think always we have to keep in mind that the DMV's job as an administrative agency is to serve the people of Vermont. And if we're not serving the people of Vermont, then it's really difficult for, you know, the trans and non-binary community to hear that that administrative hurdles that can be resolved are the reason why they're going to be further disenfranchised. And I do think that there are some, you know, important things to keep in mind. So these provisions work well with each other in that though you're having an 8-year renewal period, and so the timing of when you're getting renewal funds is more spread out. By having them able to be renewed at any time, you're making that occur more frequently, essentially. So it helps to stabilize the potential revenue. And I do believe that that would stabilize over time. Many states have made these moves. They figured it out and are continuing to do so. And I think Vermont could as well. And similarly, you know, the trans population here in Vermont is like estimated to be 1% to 2% of our population. It's a significant number of people, but it's not so significant that the DMV couldn't handle this. And this really is the critical time and the critical period. So it's important that we get this done now, if we can.
So, in addition to serving the Vermonters, I also have to serve them in a financially responsible way. So it doesn't, asking a question about finances doesn't indicate whether my support is or is not in the overall policy, but I have that, you'll know from everybody in the committee that the dollar of T dollars from the very beginning when we started all the way through is an issue that I ask about everything. So that I would say in terms of that does not an indication of the policy, whether I'm for or against that part of it, but that one's been consistent since the beginning. And go ask some loggers how they feel about my opinion on money. So, that would be fair there. Also, I should have said this beforehand. Tuesdays at this time, the vice chair and I are going to a meeting that has no reflection on your piece, and everybody else in the committee will support that we put our ranking member in charge at this point on Tuesday afternoon. So if there's some more questions, you guys can continue on that piece, and we'll be back, if you're still going, in the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you for coming in, and Representative Couch is
Yeah.
all his.
Are there any other questions for Monica? Or Monica, do you have any more clarifications?
Yeah, I just,
Chuck Lolly?
yeah, I just wanted to say, this is, these are people's rights, that we have, upheld. And I think it's important to honor that. So, we're facing a lot of very challenging decisions in this challenging period that we're going through in our country. And, I just feel that we need to remember that these are people's rights at stake, and just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Any other questions for me?
Was there, obviously there was testimony on, the DMV bill, on the issues there, and again, all you're asking is for a timing change on passage. On the other bill, do you know if there was testimony taken at all, on the 8-year, timing?
I was not asked to testify on that, so I don't know if there was testimony. I would love to testify about that, and I am hoping to inspire you all to talk further about that.
It feels like if we were to go forward or even ask more questions, we need to get the DMV in here to say, hey, how would you handle this? And also I think what Rep. Corcoran said, we do see this sort of, once they went to 4 years, this sort of waiving of funds. I think it's solvable, but we would want to, just make sure that it's not gonna, I don't imagine, well, it's hard to say. We don't know how many people we might expect.
So we're almost, we will be about 6 months into this new administration. So if we kept it at 4 years, but allowed people to renew at any time for like a certain period of time, with that being, sunsetted at a certain date, the 4-year period would cover, if that's the concern
Yeah,
with this administration.
right.
The 4 years would cover if we allowed them to register early, as we're calling it. And then sunset that, or if need be, or not. I mean, I don't know if people want to renew early, like some people, regardless of trans and non-binary, there are people that go out of the country for a year and need to get a license renewed because theirs is going to expire while they're out of the country.
Totally.
So it's not just an issue for this particular
Right, right.
issue.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that may solve the problem. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
because if that's the issue, if we could allow it to register early, which it seems some people would have to anyway, especially if they need to have a picture
Mhm.
ID at how many years?
9 years.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
yeah. So if I can address that, I do think that the early renewal is helpful. And I don't think it goes far enough. And the reason that I think that is because one, we don't know who the next president will be. We don't know what position the next administration will take. And even if even if there was a real change of heart in the next administration, there's no guarantee that that would occur within the first 100 days of their presidency. So someone who renewed right now, and then in 4 years, there was a new president in place, but this policy hadn't been changed yet, would still be facing the same issue.
But I think that we asked that, like you could renew early at any time. So if you renewed, say I renewed now. Next year, I could renew again for 4 years. I mean, it's gonna cost me money, but you see what I'm saying? You've extended it another year out.
But at that renewal, that point of renewal, that's the point that we expect to be targeted. So at the time when someone was going in for that renewal in a year, that's the time at which we anticipate that the federal administration would require or try to require changes to that identification.
Next year,
Yeah,
not this year. Okay, so,
or this year.
right. But if they renewed now, if we allowed early registration, they'd have 4 years out. Not like, so they would be covered for
They'd have
next year.
4 years out.
Yeah.
And then we run into this issue again where we don't know that the next administration would make it a priority in their next 100 days. And, if this was something that was being litigated, for example, I've been a part of litigation that's gone on for 7 years, 8 years. We just don't know that would be resolved.
Thank you.
And for all the reasons I mentioned before, it makes sense for a lot of other reasons, right? Just not requiring people to go in and renewing constantly helps people have continued access to IDs.
But Peter, did you get your question answered?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It's very enjoyable. Is there any reason why we picked 8 years?
Yeah, 8 years is the maximum amount of time that's required by the Federal Real ID Act.
Okay.
So it allows renewals for up to 8 years. 8 years is also just becoming the national standard. So more than 50% of states have moved to this 8-year renewal period.
Yeah. And the discussion about how much the money that comes into the T fund and all that type of thing, I believe it's immaterial given the human cost. But when I do my numbers and I've looked up some things, I see that we collect about $9 million a year from registration, from renewals. And it's just what would be your feeling about increasing, if we go to 8 years, that because there's going to be a loss of revenue, that we would increase it more relative to what it is now? What's your sense of that? My figures say that over 4 years, we charge $51 to get the same amount of revenue. We'd have to ask for 127. So we're almost, 1.5 times.
Yeah, I mean, currently, right now, it costs more to renew your license for 4 years than it does for 2 years.
Right.
I'm not going to speak to
No,
any
don't do
specific
that. No,
dollar amounts.
no.
And
Just
generally,
give you a
I think
sense of-
it's,
just give you a sense of
Yeah.
volume or
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not
generally, I am in favor of lessening the burdens
right.
on Vermonters to access identification. So, I have some concerns about increasing costs, but I also understand that that's a part of the work that you all have to do.
I think I could speak to that. So if you do 2 years, it's X amount. You do 4 years, it's not 2X, but it's almost 2X. There's just slight discount there. I think because there's not going to be another transaction in 2 years. So I would expect if we were to even consider moving this forward, we would have to adjust the fee accordingly and request that the DMV does it in the same way. So it might not be 8X or 4X, 2 years to there, but it might be 4X minus a little bit, like it is now.
Yeah,
I don't think they're asking that you can get an 8-year extension for the 4-year price.
pardon me, but it was just a
Sale.
discussion.
Sale price.
It was just a discussion about the impact of the dollars and what would you have to do, and then would it be reasonable within that population to charge more? And what I'm hearing is that But thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I think first of all, there are questions we could ask DMV, and since other states have done the 8-year, it's not like we would be an outlier in that. I feel like this is something small that we can do to sort of counter a lot of fear and uncertainty that all people are feeling in this time. And, it's just a little thing to do, and I would be in favor of doing it.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Yes, we can probably go offline